Let's start with something major happening right now. Military experts at the Pentagon are calling this a complete game changer. Honestly, it might be the biggest shift we've seen in the Ukraine situation since day one. Trump just made a move that Biden refused to make for years. No half measures, no strings attached, just a full green light. What did the Trump team approve this week? They crossed a line that Biden's people absolutely would not cross for 3 straight years. Why? They were worried about things getting worse, worried about how Russia might react, worried about consequences that frankly never actually showed up. And when this approval came through, guess what? The Kremlin didn't do their usual chest-thumping routine. They freaked out. Russia's foreign ministry started putting out urgent statements. Putin called his top military people into emergency meetings. Their news channels went into full crisis management mode. Why all the panic? Because Washington just said yes to the one thing Moscow had been desperately trying to prevent for years. We're talking about unrestricted long-range drone attacks deep inside Russia using American technology. Tonight, let's dig into what Trump actually approved, why Biden said no for so long, and why Russia's frightened reaction tells us everything we need to know about who really has the upper hand in this conflict. Picture this. It is Thursday morning inside a secure room at the Kremlin. Vladimir Putin is sitting with his top military commanders and intelligence people, all of them staring at reports coming out of Washington. The atmosphere is tense. The news is awful for them. Who in the room? Defense Minister Andrei Belousov is there giving the military breakdown. Security Council Secretary Nikolai Patrushev is analyzing what this means strategically. Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov is figuring out what to say diplomatically. These are the same guys who promised Putin that America would keep playing it safe. The same ones who built their whole strategy around Biden being careful. The same ones who never prepared for this possibility. Putin is going through intelligence reports confirming what America just authorized. Hess trying to understand how big this is, figuring out what the threat level is, deciding how to respond. His commanders are listening. They're taking it all in. And one after another, they're realizing something huge. This isn't America making a small adjustment. This isn't restrictions getting a little looser. Everything they built their defensive plans on, America being hesitant, the West being cautious, fear of things escalating, just fell apart with one presidential signature. And Putin, visibly processing what just happened, gets it. The entire rule book for this war just got rewritten. Think about that for a second. For 3 whole years, there were signs, not official announcements or diplomatic statements, just signals that America was getting tired of holding back. Yes, Biden was being careful, but he was getting more and more pressure to change course. His approach followed a predictable pattern, almost like a step-by-step ritual of small changes. But what set off alarm bells in Moscow this month was that the pattern just exploded. Intelligence people who watch American policy know what to look for. More and more pressure from Congress to expand what is allowed. Growing frustration from Pentagon commanders, allies pushing for no limits on weapons. The sudden silence from people who used to argue for restrictions. All of that came together this week. And when American policy suddenly shifts this dramatically, it means the political thinking has completely changed. The framework that worked for 3 years because Biden feared escalation, because Democratic voters were nervous about a bigger war, because being cautious seemed smart, just got replaced. New president arrived. New calculations made, new approvals given. When presidents decide that holding back only drags out a war, while giving the green light might actually end it faster, that is when policies transform. That is when wars enter a whole new phase. Let me be really specific about what happened this week and why Russian military command immediately saw this as a disaster for their strategy. The Trump administration approved a complete drone warfare package. We read talking about no restrictions on targeting advanced American surveillance integration and real-time intelligence sharing, all designed to let Ukraine hit anywhere in Russia, weaken Russian air defenses, and show that American support has no geographical boundaries. The approval included long-range attack drones with targeting information covering all Russian military sites, real-time satellite intelligence for coordinating strikes, advanced electronic warfare support, that Biden specifically wouldn't he allow an authorization for strikes on Russian territory without having to get approval case by case. National Security Advisor Mike Waltz, who usually chooses his words carefully, said outright that this policy represented a fundamental change in American support. He said Ukraine now has authorization to hit legitimate military targets anywhere. He said restrictions on American technology have been lifted, and he said Russia should see this as a show of determination, not escalation. When Russia's Foreign Ministry spokesperson Maria Zakharova demanded clarification, the State Department responded directly. The United States has authorized Ukraine to defend itself using all available means against Russian military targets. Period. NATO allies confirmed the policy through coordinated announcements. Within hours of the authorization, briefings were going out to allied capitals worldwide. The message was stark and unanimous. American restrictions that protected Russian territory for 3 years have been eliminated. Ukraine now has full authorization to strike military targets throughout Russia. One senior Pentagon official speaking off the record described it as taking the training wheels off, because Ukraine's capabilities were always there. Only the authorization was missing. Think about that. Russia built its entire defensive strategy around America being hesitant. For 3 years, Moscow felt confident because Biden restricted targeting, because fears of escalation kept things limited, and because Russian territory stayed mostly off-limits. That safe zone just got eliminated. The Kremlin now realizes that American restrictions are gone, that Ukrainian drones can strike anywhere, that intelligence support is unlimited, and that this new administration does operate with Biden as caution. And most devastatingly, they've figured out that 3 years of strategic planning were built on a foundation that just disappeared. When militaries realize that their defensive strategies based on the enemy holding back are worthless, that is when panic kicks in. That is when wars shift dramatically. Moscow's response this week was in confident defiance. It was in theatrical dismissal. It was in measured diplomatic protest. It was barely hidden alarm. Official after official called the American decision reckless escalation, direct confrontation, and perhaps most tellingly, something requiring immediate strategic reassessment. But escalation talk only works if the other side is afraid of escalation. The Trump administration clearly is in T. In fact, Russia's response this week was among the most panicked we've seen since the war started. Here is what we know. Within 48 hours of Washington's announcement, Moscow took emergency steps, emergency Security Council meetings, moving air defense systems from the front lines to protect targets inside Russia, suspending planned offensive operations to figure out their vulnerabilities, state media pivoting from triumphant messaging to damage control. These weren't routine adjustments. These were crisis responses. Measures Russia only takes when strategic foundations shift. Intelligence confirmed that Russian military planners are now scrambling to protect installations they previously thought were safe. Russia moved before Ukraine could fully take advantage of the authorization. They pulled air defenses back, they reinforced critical infrastructure, they abandoned offensive timelines. In other words, Russia responded to American authorization by immediately going defensive. This is what made Trump's decision so impactful. The authorization was just symbolic. It was operational. It represented the kind of policy shift that could speed up Russian collapse if fully used. Russia didn't de-escalate. They didn't threatened nuclear response. They protected themselves. They revealed their fear. And here is where it gets even more significant. Intelligence analysts now believe that Putin's entire strategy for 2025 was designed around continued American restrictions. Putin wanted to see whether Trump would keep Biden's cautious approach, whether domestic political pressure would prevent authorization, whether fear of escalation would continue. For weeks, it seemed possible. But this week, the opposite happened. Trump did teep. He eliminated them so completely, so publicly, that Putin can pretend they might come back. You don't easily reverse this kind of comprehensive authorization, But this week, Trump made clear there is nothing to reverse. The psychological impact on Putin personally represents the most significant part of this development. Putin built his war strategy around American hesitation. Putin's military planning depends on knowing where Ukraine can T-strike. This week, authorization eliminates all those safe zones. Putin can ignore the new reality because his military installations are now vulnerable. But Putin also can catch the escalation because his military is already stretched too thin. Putin is trapped between acknowledging American resolve and pretending nothing changed while everything changed. That psychological trap, combined with military overextension, creates a situation where Russian strategic options narrow dramatically. Defense analysts describe Putin's position as strategically cornered by policy reversal, a situation where the assumptions behind years of planning just evaporated. But Ukraine proved this week that they were ready. They had the capabilities. They only needed the authorization. American authorization creates cascading effects that transform the battlefield. First, it eliminates Russian safe zones, forcing defensive redeployment that weakens front lines. Second, it signals to Russian commanders that nowhere is safe, potentially speeding up internal pressure for settlement. Third, it shows allies that American support is unlimited, strengthening NATO coordination. Fourth, it sends unmistakable messages to China and Iran that Washington fully backs its partners. And fifth, it inevitably accelerates Russian military degradation as Ukraine takes advantage of newly authorized capabilities. Now, let us talk about historical parallels, because understanding how authorization decisions have transformed wars before helps us see why this moment matters so much. The most relevant parallel is the 1972 decision to authorize unrestricted bombing of North Vietnam after years of graduated response. The Nixon administration concluded that restrictions had prolonged the war, not shortened it. Authorization of full bombing campaigns accelerated negotiations dramatically. The result was the Paris Peace Accords within months. Not despite escalation, but because of it. Another parallel is Reagan's 1986 authorization of strikes on Libya, after years of measured responses to terrorism. Previous administrations had hesitated. Reagan didn't. The result was Libyan behavioral change that limited responses had failed to produce. Trump's Ukraine authorization follows the same pattern, concluding that restriction prolongs conflict while authorization accelerates resolution. The visible change hasn't happened yet, but the conditions that come before major shifts are now clearly present. What makes this moment so critical and so dangerous is that Trump's authorization happened while Putin is under maximum pressure. Military hardliners want continued offensives despite costs. Economic pragmatists want settlement before collapse. Security services want scapegoats for failures. And Putin wants survival above all. He is managing these pressures while simultaneously facing an enemy just granted unlimited strike authority. And when leaders in that position face strategic shocks, they don't respond from strength. They respond from desperation. They respond from fear. The strategic implications for Ukraine are profound and create both opportunities and risks. The opportunity is that Russian defensive redeployment creates frontline vulnerabilities. Ukraine has already shown they can exploit such openings, strike deep, when authorized, maintain pressure across multiple fronts. If Ukrainian strikes accelerate as authorization now permits, Russia might face military collapse faster than anyone anticipated. The risk is equally significant. A Putin who feels cornered might authorize desperate measures. Russian command confusion might produce unpredictable responses. The final phase might be the most volatile. Think about what this means for the coming weeks. The question facing Kai is whether to use the authorization, which seems certain from immediate Ukrainian statements, but how aggressively to exploit it while managing escalation risks. Analysts who call this game-changing understand that authorization creates opportunities but also responsibilities. The opportunity is clear. Maximum pressure while Russian defenses are redeploying. The danger is equally clear. Pushing too fast might produce desperate Russian responses. Remember, Putin thought American restrictions would hold. He thought Trump might stay cautious. He thought his territory was a sanctuary, but tonight, Ukrainian drones have authorization to strike anywhere. Russian defenses are scrambling, and the panic is visible. Now, let me bring this full circle to where we started tonight, to that moment when Trump signed the authorization that Biden had refused for 3 years. What that moment represents is in TE just policy change. But the end of Russian strategic sanctuary, the moment when Kremlin assumptions collided with American resolve. Think about what it means that Russian installations are now targetable. Think about what it means that air defenses are moving away from front lines. Think about what it means. That panic, not confidence, defines Moscow's response that is not recoverable. That strategic shock where every assumption behind military planning just evaporated. And here is the profound truth about authorization decisions. They often appear sudden, but result from built-up frustrations that observers didn't appreciate until action happened. Biden's restrictions seemed permanent until they warned Russian sanctuary appeared guaranteed until it vanished. Trump's authorization followed the same pattern, transformative because it was delayed so long. Now we're rewatching the consequences unfold, and Russia will never be the same. Tonight, one thing is clear. Trump approved what Biden refused. Russia as strategic sanctuary has ended. The Kremlin's panic is visible to the world. And tonight, for the first time since this war began, Moscow appears genuinely afraid. The Kremlin is scrambling, desperately scrambling. And when the Kremlin scrambles this frantically, it means they understand exactly what just happened. Because tonight, Putin learned something he never wanted to know. American hesitation was temporary. Authorization was always possible, and his sanctuary was an illusion. This story is far from over. We'll be here watching every detail as the next phase unfolds. Thank you for being here.